Gold watches at retirement, years of service certificates and tchotchkes, even the common nice job at the end of a project. We've all seen them as attempts to recognize people for great work. But are these methods really working? If you want a new take on better recognition, this episode is for you.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner of Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern of Talent Teams Consulting.
Today, as Chad alluded to in our intro, we are talking about recognition. So, Chad, I know based on some of the conversations we've had before and our work and learnings from Gallup, Gallup has tons and tons of information about recognition and how that can motivate employees. Do you want to share some of those stats with us?
Yeah, so this is a big one, especially in the world of work right now, trying to keep people engaged and staying in their employment and not floating around all over the place. So couple things to keep in mind when we start talking about recognition. Only 22% of employees strongly agree that they get the right amount of recognition for the work that they do. It's according to Gallup as of September of this year. So 2024. So for those of you that are listening to this now and in the future, you'll know where that stat comes from. They also find that among employees who report receiving feedback and recognition, so there's two different things. We may even get into delving into what the difference is between feedback and recognition. But if they're getting both of those components from their manager at least once a week, 61% of employees are actually engaged. When you eliminate the recognition part, that stat drops to 38%.
Oh,
yes. So it has to be a dual impact.
Sure.
The other quick stat I'll share is that people are 4 times more likely to be engaged if they strongly agree that they get the right amount of recognition for the work that they do. So there's a massive uptick in getting this right. I will also mention we're also likely going to get into generational differences. I know that you and I both saw some things out at the Gallup Summit this past year around this. But the importance of meaningful recognition holds true across all generations. So if you think, oh, well, it's just the Gen Zers or just the millennials, it's not true. Everybody in your workforce is expecting meaningful recognition. And I also just want to point out that this topic is really important to me because as someone with high responsibility, I think you'll probably jive with this too, Jen. I really, really like it when people recognize me for the effort that I put in and that when I fulfill promises, and get very discouraged and disengaged when that credit and recognition is misplaced. So that's what sort of brings me to this conversation, along with hey, we could be doing a whole lot better based on these stats I just shared. So I know why I'm coming to this conversation. Do you want to share a little bit about maybe why this is important to you? I know you share that responsibility theme with me. What about this conversation is leading you to engage today?
Yeah, so I think the big thing is what you just hit on, is that recognition, when it's done right, is personal, right? So it's personal appreciation, recognition, accolades for work that we completed. Is that getting that is so important. When employees are recognized, like Chad said with the stats, like you heard him say it increases our motivation, it increases our self-esteem, our likelihood that we're going to feel appreciated by those that we work with. Obviously increases our level of engagement. I think it's really interesting that you need the feedback and the recognition. So that leads me back to like thinking the old school days, like the feedback sandwich, like, right? Which everybody's saying like, you don't do that anymore. Like, that's not what we do. We don't give feedback sandwiches. But I think it's really, really funny that they are still tied. It's important to get both. Not at all surprised to see that it drops when you are only giving feedback and not also recognition. But I'm surprised that it dropped like half the stat, which is kind of crazy. Also, I think recognition can elevate your team atmosphere. If an employee feels appreciated, they are more likely to have their like appreciated for their efforts. They're more likely to be eager to help others on the team, right? I also, like you had started to say too, it's so important that you get this recognition right. And yeah, that's where I think my heavy executing strengths and following that along with belief, man, if you, nothing is quite as demotivating as seeing someone else receive recognition for something you've done. Maybe even having someone else get credit for your hard work or your great innovative idea. Yeah, and it might even be more important that if you're going to give recognition publicly, that you do it right. So
very much so.
Hoping we can kind of go into some of those things.
I think one of the things that you struck on, I think there are a couple of phrases that we need to clarify, which is, the feedback is really about that. Sometimes it can be positive, but it's usually about making those small course corrections. How can a manager or colleague help you fine tune, whether it's how you bring your strengths or how you develop. So that's one part. I think the other phrase that the other word that really gets mixed in here a lot is that praise component, which that's nice, but it's usually a lot more generic. It's the, hey, that's a great job. Okay, that's nice. You're on the right track. You're at least recognizing something. But I think what we're talking about here is recognition, which needs to be specific. It's the phrase of, not just, hey, great job. It's, hey, you did a great job on this project. The impact on our clients or on the customer was X, Y, and Z. And I happen to notice that you brought X, Y, and Z talents to your work in this. So you're amplifying that development and that success of essentially reflecting back to them. Oh, I've seen you. I see the work that you've done and how you got there. So I think there's a big difference between feedback, praise, and recognition, and getting those three
absolutely
right is critical to the conversation that we're going to be having today. I also think that, and the research bears this out, is that implementing really good quality recognition really has three components. It's incremental, so it's done periodically. It's well defined, so you know exactly what that recognition channel is going to be or how you're going to communicate to somebody. And then it's personalized. And I think you're going to hear, at least I know for myself, what I've discovered is that recognition, one of the biggest components is personalization. So those of you out there maybe sitting with individualization talents, you are probably going to be have a leg up on a few of us around this. But I know that there are other talents that can get there, and we're going to talk about how talents come into this discussion a little later in this episode. But I think those are the biggest things. This starting with understand those phrases and then the three components of what really good recognition looks like.
Yeah, and I have a few, like, just from my own, receiving and giving recognition. I have a few of my own too. I love that you brought in that specific. We're not doing the general like high five, great job. This is specific to what we're doing. I think it's really important to be accurate. So like if you're going to give recognition for something, maybe do a little work to find out like what all did they do? Do a little digging. What did they do? What was the impact on others? So that when you're giving that recognition, it can really honor the effort that the other person put in. I like it to be timely. So if you buy me a box of chocolates for something I did a year ago, I'm not sure that's really going to help me understand that what I did a year ago was good. And I'm like, I might not even remember what that was. And then a big one for me, and you're going to hear it out of my belief, is heartfelt. Being sincere, sharing how what they did actually affected you, or maybe the mission of the company, or your goals as a team. How if we can make that personal to how the other person affected you, I think that comes across in a deeper, more relational way. And that might be coming from some of my relationship building talents as well that are hiding just below the surface. But I think, everyone can relate to wanting to be seen like you said, and then appreciated and honored for the efforts that they put forward. And if you can tell them how that affected you, I think you're even that much closer.
There
Oh no,
are
you're good.
two really key things that I really loved about what you just said. And there are things I didn't necessarily think about going into this conversation, but you use the word heartfelt, and I can definitely
Mhm.
hear that coming out of your belief. Knowing you the way I do. I would also offer, as to other people that maybe heartfelt isn't right, like the word that they most connect with. I would also offer the word genuineness, or making
Mhm.
it genuine. As you were saying that, I was like, oh, genuine is the word that I connect with, because my analytical is always going, okay, did they really mean that?
Yeah,
Is that prove it to me. Prove to me that you're actually paying attention. And
yeah,
so that genuineness, I think, goes kind of hand in hand, or a synonym with your heartfeltness.
sure.
Um, uh,
Sincerity maybe is another word that
Sincerity.
we could use. Yeah.
There's another
Hmm.
good one. Yeah. So I love that you highlighted that, and I just wanted
Yeah,
to offer
good.
another word, just
Yeah, I like
for
that.
people that maybe don't have high belief, but maybe are looking at it more as from a strategic king
or
sort of realm,
or or relationship building
or
too. That's where
relationship building.
we're,
Right.
being more, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. The other part I really loved about what you said, and this goes back to the digging. If you
Yeah,
recognize, if you're seeing really good work and taking a moment to dig a little bit, one of the things that ties into is, especially if you haven't done, say, Clifton Strengths assessments, that's 5 clues to talent, right? That's
yeah,
recognizing the incremental steps, the where did they get moments of flow, did they achieve excellence, glimpses of excellence, all those
yep,
pieces. And we can put a link to 5 clues to talent in our resources. But I did just want to highlight that digging serves a multiple different purposes other than recognition, even though we're focusing
yeah.
on recognition today. So I thought it was really good that you highlighted that the leaders or colleagues that are looking to recognize, digging a little bit will help you beyond recognition.
Right. We talked a lot in like the last couple of episodes about that engagement and the stats around when employees are overlooked or ignored. We know they have little motivation to do their best work when they're being ignored or overlooked. So I think that goes really well into this recognition piece as well too, because if no one notices and no one seems to care, like what's the point of us working harder? And this is one of those places that, and not necessarily that they need to work harder, but if they're feeling like they're bringing their best, but no one's recognizing them for it, what, they're really left feeling just completely ignored, maybe invisible in that point. And so this is a really important place where you can start to see their accomplishments. I'm thinking back to some of the things that I've seen where the same people get like noticed or recognized over and over and over again, and everyone else is like, what are we, chopped liver? Like, wait, we had contributions to bring to. And so back to Chad's point about things being like given often, and maybe it's even weekly as when that could happen. I think that there's some great conversations to be had weekly. We talked about that weekly touch point back in a few episodes ago. And if you're also adding a level of recognition for work that they've done, and maybe even asking, what people have worked on that they got really excited about over the last week, again, to that clues to talent, right?
Yeah, I think that you really highlight that frequentness. Now, there is some research to indicate, and this is also from Gallup. They seem to be one of the leaders on how to
Yeah,
do this best. So I know we're both Gallup certified coaches. I
good,
don't want our audience thinking that we're only looking at Gallup stuff. We did look around.
right.
Work Human is another organization that's also done some really good stuff, often in
Yeah,
collaboration with Gallup, but they've also done some of their own stuff. So there is other research out there, but for the sake of brevity, we're going to keep this to some of the Gallup stuff. You mentioned
right.
that checking in once a week, and
Yeah,
having those regular touch points. I think you bring up a really good point that weekly is sort of should be the aim. Now, you may connect with your colleague or your team leader and say, hey, I may not need it quite that often. That's okay,
right.
but at least you've had the conversation. It goes back to the setting expectations conversation we just had in our last episode of,
Mhm.
what are the assumptions?
Yep.
The data says this, but that may not be the most appropriate for the person that you're trying to give recognition to. So I think I think thinking about that cadence is really important. Um,
Yeah.
there are a couple other things that I wanted to mention around sort of personalized and specific. We talk about specific timing or personalizing the timing. Um,
Yeah.
you know, one of the findings is that they have found that older leaders, and I'm not trying to paint everybody with this brush, but the tendency is older leaders are more likely to give it less often than younger workers desire. So there is a little bit of fine tuning or understanding to be built between our generations in terms of what the frequency is, but the
Yeah.
importance, as I highlighted at the top, is still the same.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that people could look at from the sort of research side is that there are really five pillars of recognition. And this is something that Gallup outlines. And we've already started to touch on some of these. We've used slightly different words, but I think some of these will resonate through.
Yep.
Fulfilling, which means that it meets the employee's needs, that you're giving them enough to fuel
Yes.
them, to make
Yes.
them keep wanting to do great work, like you were just talking about. It needs to
Right.
be authentic. So we already use the words genuine, heartfelt, authentic, um, genuineness. It should be respectful. That's that core thread is being respectful and truly honoring the work that's being done. Equitable. So recognition should be fair. It may not always be the exact same for each person, but you don't want to be giving, say, one person $100 gift card to their favorite store, and then the next person for similar work, a $5 gift card to the local
Yeah.
store. Like that's a disparity, and you need to correct that. Um, recognition should also be embedded within your culture. So this is something that hopefully it's not just you as a leader doing it, but you as a group of leaders are doing it.
Yeah.
Again, it may look a little different for each of those teams, but that you have embedded recognition within the entire culture of the team or the organization,
Mhm.
so that it is a kind of cornerstone, which is a big pillar.
Right.
And then the big one, surprise, surprise, is personalized. This is where you tailor it to the individual. I'm going to want different things than Jen is. Jen's going to want different things
Right.
than my wife might, or Jen's husband might. Um,
Right.
find out what those are. So I think one of the things that we're going to talk about in a minute is what leaders should be doing better, and this is the start of that conversation, which is you need to be asking, just like we talked about in our
Yeah.
job expectations
Yes.
episode. This is about having the honest conversation. What do you need? What does great recognition look like for you? When you do this, how do you want me to recognize you? Um, the other personal point I just wanted to drop in on top of those pillars is that I think there's a big difference between recognizing people for, say, tenure versus
Mm.
impact. So I don't know about you, but I've been at a number of institutions of higher education, and a lot is made of the length of tenure of some of the professors or some of the staff members. And I've been in those ceremonies where you get recognized for 5 years of service, 10 years of service, 15 years of service. You're retiring, and there's a big to do
Right.
about that. There's nothing wrong with longevity, but when it comes to recognition, what I think at least I'm advocating for is that leaders really take a look at, are they just sitting around doing the same 1 year's worth of work every year? Or are you actually making an impact? Are the two projects that you're doing having an impact on customers, on clients, on our coachees? When you and I, get out there and we're asking for testimonials, that's our own version of recognition. But how does that translate into the workplace? And, not necessarily just celebrating the years of service, but the impact of the work. And I just wanted to throw that in there because I didn't know exactly where it was going to fit within the rest of our conversation, but I thought it was
Right.
important that people think about separating those two things, that they are both worth of celebration, but are two very distinct recognition points.
Right. Right. Yeah. And
So,
and it can be just as important to make sure you're recognizing that tenure as it is to, the everyday or every week recognition of your employees' efforts. Because what if they forget you? They
oh,
celebrate everybody else's 5 year and they forget yours or something, like those
yeah,
moments actually mean a lot to you personally. You might be like, okay, this is the meeting, this is when they're gonna recognize that I've been here for 10 years. And then to have them not call your name, you're like, okay, I've been here 10 years, so
Yeah.
it can definitely, put a little ding in their cap there if you're not giving that recognition even for the tenure at that point
Yeah.
too.
It's interesting you say that. I just thought about, the point about being equitable. If you've done something for
Yeah.
this for the last 4 or 5 years, and the person's sort of under the expectation of like, hey, I'm going to get recognized in a certain way for my 5 or 10 years, and
Yeah.
then they decide, the organization decides to upend the method in which they recognize people. Man, talk about not being fair or not looking at what you've done, or how can you offer the same sort of level of recognition. Maybe it's something a little different, or it's a different um, takeaway,
Yeah.
if it's a tangible recognition piece. But boy, there should still be something. You don't want to just upend
Yeah.
the whole cart and
Right.
sort of ignore them or forget them. So yeah, thanks for bringing that
Yeah,
up, Jen.
and it reminds me of I can't even tell you how many countless times I've gotten Starbucks gift cards for doing a good job, or a little like thank you along the way. I don't drink coffee, so I know they have other things, but that's one of those ones I'm like, did they grab a pack of Starbucks cards and like just hand them out to
Yeah.
whoever? And in that moment, I'm like, yeah, that doesn't help motivate me at all. That's going to be like a gift I pass on to someone else. So
Yeah.
that's goes back to that fulfilling part, that Gallup talks about. Like that recognition needs to meet the needs of the person that you're giving it to.
Yeah.
Speaking of needs,
Yeah. No, that's all right. Go ahead.
we want to go to our strengths conversation, because just like understanding our talents can help us understand what motivates or maybe demotivates of an employee. I think we can also start to see, based on our talents, maybe what some of that recognition would look best as, how that would look
Okay.
best, right?
Yeah. Do you want to give us an example? You want to start us off?
Well, actually, I was going to go a different route with it, where if you're a manager, let's say, and you lead with relationship building, you might be more apt to recognize them for how they work with others, right? So that's
Oh, okay.
a little different, where you're almost giving the recognition based on your own personal strengths lens.
Okay.
But that might not be the way the other person. So if you're a high relationship building, and we're going to get a little mixy here. If you're a high relationship building manager and you're giving recognition to someone who's high strategic thinking, it might mean that you need to blend these two things. So like, I
Mm.
appreciate you for the innovative ideas that you came up with, your ability to take the team's efforts and their ideas and put this into a spreadsheet so all of us can easily understand what the impacts of our work are. Getting to the end, I don't, just throwing an example out there, but this might be a way that you can look at what they bring and how their talents are working, in order to give them feedback that honors them, but also you're honoring your own
Yeah.
talents
Okay.
by being able to share that with others. If you're a manager that leads with executing, you might be more apt to recognize or reward someone for, again, how the work gets done, not what gets done, right? So
Yep.
it's
Okay.
really important. And we've talked about that before, where achievers specifically are technically pretty messy. They get the work done, but they might not have like some of the high discipline, where like they have a certain process that they follow. It might be a little messier. So we don't want to recognize someone for how the work gets done, but maybe what gets done, that end product. The same with the influencing. If you lead with high influencing, you may be more apt to recognize the impact others are making, which is fantastic. We want to talk about the impact they're making. And then the other one I had was strategic thinking. You might be more apt to recognize people for the decisions that they're making, and how they affect the team.
So I would see this as, if you're a manager or leader with themes that are maybe a little bit more I'm going to stay with the relationship building.
Sure.
You are likely more apt to build a very strong understanding of your people. That's where you're going to really excel in terms of figuring out the recognition piece for you and your team, that
Yeah, good.
you're gonna have those strong relationships to go on. Now, where you might need some help is maybe capturing or remembering and then executing on it. You might have the
Yeah,
information, but how are you keeping track of that? So, maybe you have high individualization and you gave them one thing one year and you got to remember, okay, what did I give them last year? How are you
for
capturing
sure.
and remembering that? And people with strategic thinking themes or executing themes can help you, figure that out. But I think that the
Okay.
benefit there is that you'll have the relationships. I think,
Yeah, I like that.
as you're talking, I was also thinking about our executing. You mentioned you have a lot of executing themes. Um,
Hmm.
we're probably more likely, and my responsibility is in there too, along with my deliberative. We're more likely to build in probably the routines or
Oh
offering the
yeah,
recognition, like keeping the cadence is probably right up that channel. That's comfort for that's really easy for us to do. Now, one of the things we may need some help with is making sure that we still have the relational substance that we just mentioned about our relationship
right.
building colleagues. So if you're an executing domain dominant leader, know that you're probably going to do a really good job of keeping that cadence. Just make sure you've got some substance behind it. Um,
Right.
it's if you're bringing the cadence and just going, "Great job this week," that does
Right.
not provide the personalization that we've been talking about so far in this conversation. Um,
Yes.
when we think about strategic thinking domain talented leaders and managers, I would suspect that people with like learner, like I have, or context or input, might do really well to learn and capture how each person wants the recognition. Um, but what themes might they need to lean into to actually provide the recognition? Maybe
Yeah.
at elections, so you've thought about it a lot, but maybe it takes a little bit of time to actually get it out. And that goes back to your point about the relevance and recency of the
Yeah.
recognition. So you don't want to spend too much time thinking about it. I
Right.
will admit the one area, and I'm curious if you have some ideas on this. The one domain that I actually get challenged a little bit on in terms of bringing some insight on is the influencing domain, because so many of those themes have sort of an exterior or an external focus. They're usually focused on commanding a situation or influencing others. Um, and your recognition is a way to influence, but I don't want that to come across as manipulative.
Yes.
Um,
Right.
right. So and there is also a sense of maybe some perfectionism with that maximizer within that domain.
Sure.
So I'm just wondering, do you have any thoughts on how a leader or manager with influencing um, domain themes might do their best at bringing recognition to the table?
They're so very talented at motivating others anyway. Understanding what motivates their team members, I think, is really going to be their strong point. They already probably know it, and so maybe even leaning a little harder into getting understanding what those cadences are for each person,
Mm.
and then making it more about how can they, and not in a manipulative way, but how can they continue to push their team members, influence them more, to give them more recognition, to give them opportunities to kind of meet that level that they're putting out there.
Yeah.
You know where I'm going with that?
I think so. I think you started well. You've done a lot better than I have. Like you've got at least some out there. I really appreciate you what you're sharing there. There is that I hadn't really thought about that. Is that influencing? They're already starting
Yeah, they're
to
so good at it.
starting to bring people along and recognize. They may have to balance that maybe those maximizer command or self
Right.
assurance or significance balance a little bit more on an edge. Um, but they do have that tilt toward a focus on people, which is really
Mhm.
what we're talking about here. Yeah, we're talking
Yeah.
about cadences, we're talking about methods, we're talking about, but it really comes down to focusing on your people, making sure that they're still engaged. And so I
Right.
think your points about those with influencing themes already doing that naturally are really well taken. And thank you very much for
And
kind of filling in my my
yeah.
blank spot. My brain just didn't quite get there because all my influencing themes, full disclosure, are well at the bottom of my report. The last four themes are all influencing, and my first influencing doesn't show up until it's 19 or 20. So
Oh,
this was that was an area that I was having a little bit of a tougher time relating to. But I hope our
yeah.
listeners that have influencing themes really listen to your thoughts.
What I love about this conversation specifically is it reminds me of a book I read in the early 90s called The Love Languages. So this was
Oh,
a book
yes.
all about relationships, and you might have heard of this
Yep.
before. And it has a little like test in it to kind of give you an idea of how you give or want to receive love and what there's like the five love languages. Sorry, that's the name of the book, the five love languages. And it's
Yeah.
acts of service, words of affirmation, gifts, physical touch, and quality time. And what the book, and this is why I'm bringing this up. I promise it parallels. Why I think this is important to talk about is they found in the studies around this, like how we give and receive love are based off of how we want to receive love. So if
Mhm.
we are a quality time person, that quality time is important to us, we may be giving others our quality time, but they might be a acts of service person. So they're out washing your car and you're like, I just want you to sit here with me on the couch. You
Right.
know,
Yeah.
it's how this imbalance can happen. And I think the same can happen with talents. If we're not careful, we can be giving recognition. So like that Starbucks gift card, you as a manager may love Starbucks and it's like your favorite place to go every morning and you're, like stopping in every day. And so you may think that all of your employees would love that because you do, but that might not be the case. They might not drink coffee. They might not even have a Starbucks anywhere near them. So it's important to really get
Yeah.
to that personalized touch. So that's where my parallels were going with, understanding our themes, our motivations, what our talents need, and then being able to tie that to maybe what the person needs, plus on, honoring ourselves and what we need as well.
Yeah, no, Jen, that's a great analogy and crossover. First of all, I too have read that book. Really powerful. And I think this goes to that personalization. You may think, oh, a gift card is sufficient. Maybe that one person wanted 5 minutes of being highlighted at your next team meeting. They don't care
Right.
about the gift card side. They want the public recognition. So yeah, managing those mismatches between
Yeah.
public and private, and gifts versus words. Um,
Mm-hmm.
you want to think about how those cross, based on our talent themes. Um, I'm very hesitant. Sometimes I can be a little hesitant to give recognition. And I know I own that comes out of my deliberative, my analytical. I want you to really prove to me that you're worthy of the
Yeah.
recognition I'm about to bestow on you. Um, I've learned to manage that a little bit. Uh, so I'm hopefully getting better. But that same sort of thing of like, okay, I need to be more aware of what people are doing and recognizing them a little faster, even if it's for the incremental steps. Um, I think about a lot of what I do as a youth soccer coach. Each kid needs just a little bit. Some kids want to be recognized in front of all their peers and be called out for making a fantastic pass in practice, or maybe it's even during the game. Other kids want me to, spend just a couple minutes with them on the bench and, one on one, say, hey, you
Yeah.
did this really well, and this is how it turned out. And do you see how you made that happen? Um, I can go either way, but
Yeah.
sometimes the kid needs one thing that I might not be thinking about. And I think the same
Right.
thing goes over into what leaders and managers, um, the trap that they can fall into is, oh, I think that they want one thing because that's what I would want, versus putting somebody up on a stage where the manager may not want any public recognition, and that the
Right.
team member definitely wants the spotlight. So I love that you brought up that analogy with the love
Yeah.
languages. I'm not sure the actual phrasing of the languages fits
Right.
exactly,
No.
because I'm not sure physical touch. We could probably get into
Well,
a whole other
yeah,
conversation around that. But I think the
right.
personalization and the mismatch is, I think, the more critical key to your analogy.
Right.
I
Yeah.
hope leaders and managers are listening to what Jen's having to say, because it's powerful and needed. So,
Well, and I'm thinking, I mean, I even kind of like was trying to think of what might some of these examples be. And like the physical touch one, I kind of laughed because I'm a high fiver.
oh,
And
okay.
and it makes me think back to the Seinfeld episodes with Putty, and he'd be all like high five, you know, and he wants to high five everybody about everything, and everyone's like, oh my goodness, stop high fiving. So okay, I'm not that bad, but I do like to high five. I'm like, let's high five about that. Let's fist bump. And like, let's get ourselves a pat on the back. One of my favorite memes is a guy and he's all patting himself on the back about stuff. So, I mean, that might be something that actually is motivating to you,
Sure.
or that you like, you know, as your manager walks by and you like throw your hand up, yeah, give them a high five, go for it. Because that one little gesture means a lot to those who like to high five
Yeah.
or fist bump or whatever that might be.
Nice.
So where I don't know that we need to be like hugging each other over things, and you know the pats on the back maybe, yeah, we don't want to get into any like HR issues with those, but I liked the mismatch thought of
Yes.
with it.
Yeah.
My maybe the best thing you're going to get from Chad and I today is that we have a tip to decode what your people need. Are you ready for it? Are you ready to give it to
Go
them?
for it, Jen. Go.
Ask
Ah,
them. Right, so we're back to
yeah.
that like we did with our last episodes about the assumptions. I mean, these are really easy questions to ask, you know, like how do you like to be recognized, who, you know,
Yeah.
like do you want to be up on stage, do you want like the big crowd and applause? Maybe we can't do that for everything they do, you know, for every type of recognition, but if there's something big that's really important to them, maybe it starts off as something small, and as you continue to your conversation with them, you're like, this is really amazing. Like you brought some really great impacts. I'd like to share this with the whole company. Are you comfortable with that? You know, like being able to have those conversations. It's just like our last episode with the setting expectations, that user's manual. We can add, you know, this line of recognition and what that needs to look like for us, right?
It's funny you went there, because that's exactly where I was going to sort of help the conversation along, is that this is part of that setting expectations. It's the setting expectation of what does good recognition look like for you. So I love that you hit, you know, you touched on the user manuals, that this is a relatively positive conversation to have. You know, a lot of people say,
Yes.
you know, oh, I do want to be recognized. Now, I will, you're going to hear my deliberative come back into this. Some people are a little hesitant to talk about themselves or have themselves celebrated. So for some people, the manager or leader may need to dig a little bit more of like, you know, hey, I understand you might be thinking this is public recognition. If that's not what you want, what do you want instead? I want to still be able to recognize you for really good work, because, you know, we've hired you to do a really good job. And when you fulfill that, I want to do something, you know, that should not go unnoticed.
Right.
And
And maybe shouldn't go unnoticed by the rest of the company.
right.
But then in what way can you make that
In what
comfortable
way?
for that person?
Yeah.
I
The
love that.
component I would add to that conversation, you know, you're talking about sort of methods of recognition. I would also add, and this is the one big piece I would add to that conversation, is frequency. How frequently do you want to be recognized? There are some people that are sort of recognition camels. They get a little bit and it feeds them for a really long time. And then there are others that need it, you know, on that weekly basis, because, you know, the research has shown that that's what our brains can usually manage in terms of remembering, oh, that's, I got recognized, that's going to give me fuel for the next week to get the next thing done, to get the next thing done, to get the next thing done. So go and ask your people, how frequently do you want me to recognize? Is it at the end of every project? Is it at the end of every week? Is it at the beginning of every week? You want me to take Monday, recognize you for last week's work, so that you now have fuel for the next, you know, 5 days. So that's an add I would put to the conversation you need to have around this.
Love it.
I also think that, you know, we've already talked a little bit about this. Just be aware of your preferences having an impact on what types of recognition that they give. And then the other thing that I would really just recommend it and reinforce that leaders should be doing differently is that making sure it's specific. I know we've mentioned that a bunch of times already in this episode, but Well, you've got to make it specific. You've got to, you know, it shows the team member that the leader is actually paying attention
Yes.
and being, you know, recognized as a human being in the world, that, oh, I exist and I am having an impact here. If you're
Yeah.
not doing that, it's really easy to get discouraged and disengaged. And so I would
Yeah,
just
we all want to be seen, and I think that's a fantastic way to show
yeah,
that you are being seen.
yeah.
Mhm.
So so anyway, those we kind of backed into the conversation
Great.
about what leaders should be doing differently, but I think you heard it. Think about the love languages or the
Right.
workplace version of them. Be specific.
Right.
Think about the frequency. Have the conversation. You know, you use that big word
Yes.
ask. I love
Right.
that. So I have to say, just, you know, we've had a great time doing this. I'd like to recognize Jen's effort for filling in
Oh,
my blank
yes.
spot on the influencing domains, coming to my rescue. For those, you know, our listeners out there, I hope that this episode has been helpful in helping you figure out how to better recognize your people, what you can be doing a little differently. Hopefully, we're going to move away from the, you know, the gold watches at the end of 35 years of service, and maybe we can think about being a little bit more frequent and timely, um,
Intentional. Yeah.
and intentional about it. Thank you, Jen.
Yeah.
So with that, I'm going to keep encouraging you to keep playing to your strengths.
And be uniquely you.
If you like this episode, we encourage you to like, follow, and subscribe to wherever you find your podcasts.